I wanted to first start on this verse here, verse 10, because there's a lot of beautiful points in this verse itself that Srila Prabhupada chose not to comment on in this particular purport, but he does comment on in other purports and throughout his writings and literature. So I thought I would take a moment to dive into them just a little bit. It's Bali Maharaj talking about his grandfather. His grandfather is Prahlad Maharaj. Um, so my grandfather, the best of all men, Prahlad Maharaj, who achieved unlimited knowledge and was worshipful for everyone, was afraid of the common men in this world. The word unlimited knowledge here is mentioned aghada bodha, which I imagine, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but um, is related to the word buddhi, means intelligence. And Krishna mentions where we get intelligence from in the Bhagavad Gita. Anybody know where in the Bhagavad Gita Krishna mentions where we get buddhi from? It's a famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most famous verses. Other than Adi Purushvara, he knows every verse in the Bhagavad Gita etched into his heart. Anybody else know in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna tells us where intelligence comes from? Specifically, this word buddhi yoga comes from. He gives it to us. Krishna?
Dadami buddhi yogam tam.
Yes, is that Goshran?
Yes, Prabhu.
Also, who knows every verse of the Bhagavad Gita etched into his heart. So yes, so Krishna mentions this in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam jainamam upayanti te. Buddha specifically means intelligence. It also can mean enlightenment, just like Buddha is the enlightened one. So Krishna says, to those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So similar to what I was sharing before we started reading about this idea of coming together in the association of devotees, because actually we are Srila Prabhupada. How would Srila Prabhupada, when Srila Prabhupada came to America, he wrote these prayers on the Jaladuta. And how did he sign his name when he shared these prayers? What did he share? And he was sharing in these prayers, my dear Lord, English is not my first language. I'm coming from a different culture. I've never been here before. There are so many things, there are so many barriers that can get in the way of me trying to share this message of yours. But I'm trying with my full and sincere heart. And if you wish, then this message can be made known to them. Despite, and Srila Prabhupada so humbly in the second canto, the first canto of Bhagavad, or it's in the, maybe in the fifth canto, I think it's in the fifth chapter of the Bhagavatam, Narad Muni speaking to Vyasadeva, saying that this message is heard by men who are thoroughly honest. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport describes that even if there are frailties in the presentation, the true spirit of it can come through if we are sincere. And so Srila Prabhupada is making that petition when he's traveling to America before he reaches the shore on the Jaladuta. He's praying to Krishna to make his words carry potency, to change the hearts of the people he's coming to connect with. And how does he sign his name? Anybody know how he signs his name on those poems?
Your most insignificant beggar?
The most
Servant?
insignificant beggar. He's a beggar. And so, like this, also, Srila Prabhupada is saying here in this verse, to those who are constantly serving with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So we are begging for this buddhi yoga. We're begging for this intelligence. We're begging for guidance. Because why do we? What happened? Why would you beg for anything? You beg because you recognize it's not something you can get on your own, but it's something that you desperately want and need. And so when we recognize that it's not something we can attain or get on our own, humility follows a natural sense of humility flows from somebody who recognizes that they need somebody else to get what they want or need. And there are two ways of getting what you want or need from somebody who has what you want or need, materially and spiritually. Materially, we use manipulation. We use manipulation to try to get other people. Somebody has what I want, and so I'm going to try to manipulate them, manipulate the circumstance, try to force God's hand to give me what I want. Um, and spiritually, we use service. We use service, selfless devotional service in order to invoke the blessings of those who have what we want so that we can get what we need. And therefore, we perform our devotional service in a mood of a beggar, like Srila Prabhupada. What are we begging for? We're begging for this buddhi yoga, this intelligence to be bestowed upon us. And what type of intelligence? It's mentioned here in the verse unlimited knowledge. Unlimited knowledge. And so, unlimited knowledge means devotees have unlimited knowledge. What does that mean? It means we know what we need to know. Doesn't mean unlimited knowledge in the sense that I know every single thing about the material world. I know. Srila Prabhupada was once asked if he knows everything. And Prabhupada said he knew everything. And so somebody asked him a question: how many windows are in the Empire State Building? Some of you heard this story. Anybody know what Srila Prabhupada said his answer was? Gorsharan is smiling. Gorsharan?
He said, "You go and count."
You go and count. I heard a different answer. Maybe he was asked on 2 different occasions. Another answer that I heard was,
How many drops of water are there in a mirage?
yes,
Yeah, that's what I
yeah,
heard.
yes, yeah. How many drops of water are in a mirage? And so Srila Prabhupada was saying that you're trying to study an illusion. You're trying to study an illusion. And so knowledge means I know what I need to know. And, you know, sometimes what somebody knows, the extent of their knowledge in something, it also it indicates their values. And so, for example, you look at the Western periodic table of the elements, and where they're always discovering like a new element, where there's 30, 40, however many, 50 elements that are there. It's like this detailed table of the elements that exist. And when you look at what's the Vedic table of the elements in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita? You know the Sanskrit, Gorsharan? What is it?
Yeah. भूमिरापो अनलो वायुर्खमनो बुद्धिरेव च अहंकार इत्यमे भिन्न प्रकृतिरष्टधा.
Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Bas. That's it. That's all you need to know about the combination of elements in the material world. Because the Vedic culture doesn't place a huge value in understanding every detail in the material world. You just need to know enough in order to get out. And so when there's unlimited knowledge that's here, it's mentioning this unlimited knowledge about the nature of spiritual subject matters. And that spiritual subject matters is bestowed upon the devotee who is a devotee of the Lord through devotional service. So Prahlad Maharaj achieved that unlimited knowledge. And it's interesting that he mentions unlimited knowledge because the story of Prahlad Maharaj comes when he was sent to school to learn materialistic knowledge, but he refused to learn that materialistic knowledge. And actually, his teachers became fearful because they're like, "Oh my God, he's not learning what our father told us to learn, to teach him. We're going to get in trouble." But that's how the whole story took place when he said, "Oh, best of the demons," he was talking Hiranyakashipu, "what did you learn in school today?" He said, "I learned in school today that your enemy Vishnu is the Lord creator of everything." And therefore, the whole pastime took place. So, who achieved unlimited knowledge and was worshipable for everyone, was afraid of the common men in this world. So, there's this beautiful also in the 7th chapter. Where does Prahlad Maharaj? It's interesting because Prahlad Maharaj specifically is known for being fearless. That when Lord Nrsingadev, after he killed Hiranyakashipu, all the demigods, even Lakshmi Devi herself, tried to pacify Lord Nrsingadev, but they were stunned in fear in his presence, and even Lord Brahma or Lakshmi Devi herself could not approach the Lord in the face of his deep anger. And therefore, Prahlad Maharaj was selected to offer prayers and petition to Lord Nrsingadev because he was not afraid in the Lord's presence. Why? Because it's mentioned in the subsequent purport. It's very beautiful here. Prabhupada mentions, except Prahlad Maharaj and Bali Maharaj considered Vishnu their eternal traditional enemy. As described by Bali Maharaj, Lord Vishnu was actually not the enemy of the family, but the best friend of the family. So Prahlad Maharaj understood that the Lord is my friend, even in his greatest anger. I shall not fear. One time, Govinda Prabhu, it was Govinda Prabhu, a senior disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Swami. Gadadhar Pandit told me this story once. Gadadhar Pandit was Radhanath Swami's personal servant for a number of years when he was a brahmachari here in New York. And um, he asked, Gadadhar Pandit asked Govinda Prabhu, because sometimes Govinda Prabhu would give classes in front of Maharaj, or, and he would ask, do you ever get nervous, like speaking in front of Maharaj or giving a class in front of Maharaj, in front of your guru? And he said, I'm the least nervous. He said, how is that possible? He said, because I've been sitting in front of my father. He said, why would I be nervous in front of my father? I know that he is my eternal well-wisher. And so that mood, that understanding that our guru, and who's the representative of the Supreme Lord Krishna, is our father, is our protector, is our ever well-wisher. Srila Prabhupada would also sign his name to the disciples, your ever well-wisher. So even in their anger, we know we have nothing to fear, because the Lord is, what is it? The Bible, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so Prahlad Maharaj, in the face of Nrsingadev, even in his greatest anger, he's like, I have nothing to fear here. This is my Lord, my Father, my protector. And so Srila Prabhupada mentions here, all right, this is in the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam where this reference is coming from. 7th canto, chapter 9, Prahlad pacifies Lord Nrsingadev with prayers. He mentions, O my Lord, you are never conquered by anyone. Very apt to say you are never conquered by anyone, because he just faced Hiranyakashipu, who was the ruler of the universe and who had conquered the entire universe and all the demigods. And so nobody could conquer Hiranyakashipu, but Lord Nrsingadev conquered that very Hiranyakashipu. So, Lord, you are never conquered by anyone, including my father, who is feared by everyone throughout the universe. I am certainly not afraid of your ferocious mouth and tongue, your bright eyes eyes bright like the sun, or your frowning eyebrows. I do not fear your sharp pinching teeth, your garland of intestines, your mane soaked with blood, your high wedged like ears. Nor do I fear your tumultuous roaring, which makes elephants flee to distant places, or your nails, which are meant to kill your enemies. So all the things that all of the demigods and Lakshmi Devi herself were standing in fear of, Prahlad Maharaj is standing in front of him saying, I do not fear you, my Lord, because I know you are not my enemy. And that's how our devotees are fearless. Srila Prabhupada, his name is Abhay Charanadavinda, fearless at the lotus feet of the Lord. And so devotees have no cause for fear, even in the most dangerous of circumstances in the material world. You see this very exemplified. It's beautifully in Indrajuma Swami. You read his diaries of a traveling monk. It's like Indiana Jones stories for spiritualists. All the adventures that he goes on, but he's fearless because he knows that he's protected. He has the Lord's protection, and so devotees yearn for this fearlessness. But even that Prahlad Maharaj, he's saying, I'm not afraid, excuse me, of any of those things. In the next verse, O most powerful, insurmountable Lord, who are kind to the fallen souls, I have been put into the association of demons as a result of my activities, and therefore I am very much afraid of my condition of life within this material world. When will that moment come when you will call me to the shelter of your lotus feet, which are the ultimate goal for liberation from conditional life? So Prahlad Maharaj is not afraid of any of these fearful elements of the Lord's ferocious personality. Is saying that he is afraid. What is he afraid? He's afraid of falling into the association of materialistic people, because that materialistic people will lead him astray from the shelter of that lotus feet. And Srila Prabhupada, there's too much to cover, we won't go into the purport. And therefore Srila Prabhupada is known as saying that if there is he would say sometimes, the defect of my disciples is that they are not afraid enough of Maya. And that there's a healthy fear that devotees, one time I asked Jayadvaita Swami a question. He said, sometimes you look at senior devotees, or you look at stories in the Bhagavatam, like Bharat Maharaj, who was such an advanced soul, who even in his years of meditation and his renunciation of the kingdom became attached to a deer and he fell down. If great souls like that experience struggle, it creates a certain fear, like, how will I even make it? What will become of me? And he said, he said that's a good fear to have. He said keep that healthy fear. That fear keeps us gives us a certain sense of of sharpness on our toes. And George Harrison wrote a song, "Beware of Maya." Beware of Maya. He wrote that song, "Beware of Maya." And so there's a certain fear that devotees keep. There's a very, very much a healthy fear that devotees keep of being afraid and keeping ourselves protected from the material world. And so, okay. So he achieved unlimited knowledge. He was afraid of common people in this world. And Prahlad Maharaj, he was fully convinced of the substantiality afforded by shelter at your lotus feet, and he took shelter of your lotus feet against the will of his father and demoniac friends who were killed by your own sense. To be fully convinced, Srila Prabhupada or Chaitanya, Krishnadas Kaviraj defines this fully convinced in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Shraddhe Shabde Vishvasa Kahe Sudhridha Nischaya Krishna Bhakti Kaila Sarva Karma Krita Haya. That Shraddha is confident, firm faith that by rendering transcendental loving service to Krishna, one automatically performs all subsidiary activities. Such faith is favorable to the discharge of devotional service. That this faith is required, otherwise, we will give up our activities because we're going against the grain of what everything else in life is telling us. And it comes sometimes even at the extent of against the will of his father and demoniac friends. That there's a psychologist or an influencer that I follow on social media that talks about emotional healing and growth. And one of the things she says is that some relationships will not survive our healing process. As we heal and as we grow, there are some relationships that just won't survive the process because we are growing out of them. And those relationships that made sense in a dysfunctional way of life, as we start to illuminate our consciousness and gain clarity about what our priorities are, certain relationships just won't survive the process. And so that is mentioned here also, that Prahlad Maharaj, he never turned an ill will towards his fathers and demonic friends, but those relationships, his taking shelter of the lotus feet came at the cost of some of those relationships. And we must be willing as devotees to take a stand against material consciousness and have that firm faith and conviction, as mentioned here in the purport to this verse by Srila Prabhupada in the Majjhima Lila of Chaitanya Charitamrita. That firm faith and confidence are called Shraddha. The word Shraddha literally means, what does the word Shraddha literally mean in Sanskrit? Anybody know?
Is it faith, no? Or no?
Sorry, what was that, Kel?
Is it faith?
Safe.
Safe.
It includes safety. No, but there's an etymology of what the word Shraddha literally means.
Oh, okay. To take shelter, maybe? Yeah.
Take shelter. It involves taking shelter. Literally means that where you give your heart. Dha, hridai, dha, to give your heart. That place where you give your heart. And so if we're giving our heart to Krishna, that means that everyone else needs to know I'm not giving it to you. And so some people have to know that our heart belongs to Krishna. And so by giving our heart to Krishna means that we are not giving it to other places in this material world. And so this full faith mentions here that when one engages in the Lord's devotional service, they are to be understood to have performed all the responsibilities in the material world. They satisfied their forefathers, ordinary living entities, and demigods, and are free from all responsibility. Such a person does not need to meet their responsibilities separately. It is automatically done. Fruitive activity is meant to satisfy the senses of the conditioned souls. However, when one awakens to Krishna consciousness, he does not have to work separately for pious activity. The best achievement of all fruitive activity is detachment from material life, and this attachment is spontaneously enjoyed by the devotee firmly engaged in the Lord's service. So this faith that if I simply serve Krishna, all other needs will be satisfied. And that although it may disrupt or disturb materialistic relationships around us, we should have this faith that if I continue my devotional life with integrity, Krishna will soothe them in their hearts. I don't need, I was talking to just Rasika about this last night. I'm really not a person that likes to get into debates. Um, I really don't like to try to convince anybody of anything. It's just not my nature, and I don't like to. I mean, I get into arguments because I'm a hot-headed Pitta Italian egocentric individual. So I get into arguments with people, but I don't like to get into debates about like if somebody doesn't believe in whether it's evolution or believes about God or believes about, I wouldn't be a good preacher in that sense because I feel like people will believe what they want to believe. And I trust that whatever needs to take place, it's Krishna in their heart that will make that connection for them. And so sometimes, we feel that we need to convince other people of what we're doing or prove to people that what we're doing makes sense. And actually, what we can do is by serving Krishna, Krishna in their heart will illuminate whatever knowledge they need to understand about devotional life. And the best we can sometimes do is be a simple, good example, not criticize, perform our devotional service with integrity. And Krishna is in the hearts of every living entity will give them the understanding that they need to take place. And we don't need to force a realization upon anybody because we can't do that. And so Prahlad Maharaj himself couldn't even convince his father, even though he was a pure devotee. It took the Lord's coming, and the Lord came in a very, very strong way to Hiranyakashipu. And so, and it's very beautiful. Srila Prabhupada quotes this verse also in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita 241, Vyavasyatmaka Budhir Ekeha Kurunandana Bahushaka Hyanantascha Budhayo Vyavasayanam. Again, this word buddhi, this intelligence becomes those who are on this path are resolute in purpose and their aim is one, O beloved child of the Kurus. The intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. A strong faith, again, this word faith is mentioned here, that by Krishna consciousness one will be elevated to the highest perfection of life is called Vyavasayatmaka intelligence. And Srila Prabhupada again quotes this verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Shraddhe Shabda. Shabde means to be called, known as Shraddha. Faith means unflinching trust in something sublime. When one is engaged in the duties of Krishna consciousness, he need not act in relationship to the material world with obligations of family traditions, humanity, or nationality. So again, this Prahlad Maharaj being exemplified as an example, being fully convinced by the substantiality afforded by your shelter at your lotus feet, took shelter of your lotus feet against the will of his father and demoniac friends who were killed by yourself. So Prahlad Maharaj took a stand, and that may sometimes require us to take a stand. Who am I trying to please? And so sometimes the confusion about the direction of our devotional life is that very question: who am I trying to please? Who am I trying to be accepted in the eyes of? And when that question becomes clear, then sometimes our direction becomes clear, and that faith becomes very, very clear. So this is this background verse. My grandfather, the best of all men, who achieved unlimited knowledge and was worshipful for everyone, was afraid of the common men in this world. Being fully convinced of the substantiality afforded by your shelter at your lotus feet, he took shelter at your lotus feet against the will of his father and demoniac friends who were killed by your own self. And the next verse is first Prabhupada gave the purport. Only by providence have I been forcibly brought under your lotus feet and deprived of all my opulence. Because of the illusion created by temporary opulence, people in general who live under materialistic conditions face accidental death at every moment. Facing accidental every moment, do not understand that this life is temporary. Only by providence I have been saved from that condition. Bali Maharaj being very humble here. He says twice, only by providence, only by providence. By some chance, by some destiny, the word used in the Sanskrit is daiva, by destiny. I have been forcibly brought under your lotus feet. But many people are brought. What happened to Bali Maharaj? He promised 3 steps of land. Vamanadev took the entire universe in 2 steps of land, and therefore the 3rd step of land could not be taken, and therefore he bound Bali Maharaj up and he charged him with a crime. And so in that condition, Bali Maharaj surrendered to the Lord. But many people do not choose surrender. How many times do we not choose surrender? How many people do you see them being grinded to a pulp by the forces of material nature, yet they do not surrender, or they do not take the opportunity to turn to Krishna. We choose bitterness, we choose resentment, we choose anger, we choose why is this happening to me, etc. All these things. It takes a special person to take the path of Bali Maharaj and choose that actually this is being done for my fortune. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Parikshit Maharaj comes across Dharma in the form of a bull being beaten by Kali. And the cow, Mother Umi Bhumi, and the cow and Dharma are crying of pain, being beaten by Kali. And Parikshit Maharaj asks, who has done this to you? Who has maimed you in this way? This Dharma standing on one leg, who has maimed you in this way? And anybody know the answer that Dharma gave? Gorsharan shaking his head, yes. Gorsharan, you're my backup if nobody else knows the answer. Anybody know what Dharma said? In general, you don't have to know. You don't have to quote specifically.
So just in general, I would say he wouldn't name anybody.
Yeah, Gail, you wouldn't name anybody. Gail, you're my second backup. He wouldn't name. He said it's hard to tell. Some people say it's karma. Some people say it's destiny. Some people say it's time, etc. He wouldn't tell. And then Parikshit said, "You are Dharma personified." Refusing to point to blame, even though it's. I mean, what are you talking about? Anybody? You're literally being beaten right here. I can point to the person. Refusing to take that blame. And so, it takes a certain person to choose a blame of what's being happened to them. How we explain the circumstances that are happening in our life says a lot about our devotional development. How we assess the circumstances that are being taken to us in some way serves as a barometer for our spiritual advancement. How we blame or how we take shelter. And Bali Maharaj here is not taking any credit. He's not saying, I was brought to your lotus feet and thank you so much. And devotees don't take any credit for their spiritual acumen and devotional sentiment. And therefore, it's a service for us to praise Vaishnavas because they will never praise themselves. And so devotees take it upon themselves to find the good qualities of devotees and highlight them, because otherwise the world would never know. And so Bali Maharaj very humbly saying, only by providence I've been forcibly brought into your lotus feet. But yes, by providence he was brought to that place, but it was his devotional mood that allowed him to see it in a particular way. And he's saying, because of the illusion created by temporary opulence, people in general who live under material conditions, facing accidental death at every moment, do not understand that this life is temporary. And so Srila Prabhupada talks about seeing the Lord as a friend. And it's interesting, he mentions here, the Lord bestows special favor upon his devotee by taking away all his material opulences. Bali Maharaj appreciated his behavior by the Lord, therefore he said, it is to bring me to the right platform of eternal life that you've put me in these circumstances. Therefore we talk about the circumstances themselves are mercy of the Lord, and then the realization to take those circumstances in the right way is also the mercy of the Lord. So we pray, my dear Lord, help me see things the way you see things, and help me respond the way you want me to respond to things. And then Srila Prabhupada talks about materialistic way of life, and every devotee in Krishna should always be afraid of the common person engaged in pursuing material propensity. And lastly, we'll just mention here in this verse, Prahlad Maharaj also mentions this in the Bhagavatam in his prayers. This is Canto 7, Chapter 5. It says, persons who are strongly entrapped by the consciousness of enjoying material life and have therefore accepted their leader or guru as their leader grew, a similar blind man attached to external sense objects cannot understand that the goal of life is to return home back to Godhead and engage in the devotional service of Lord Vishnu. As blind men guided by another blind man miss the right path and fall into a ditch, materially attached men led by another materially attached man are bound by the ropes of fruit of labor, which are made of strong cords, and they continue again and again in materialistic life. suffering the threefold miseries. And therefore, Rupa Goswami mentions in the beginning of his Nectar of Instruction, the first verse he mentions, Vacho Vegam Manasakroda Vegam, that he says that a person who controls these 6 urges of the mind, anger, belly, tongue, genitals, speech, they are qualified to make disciples all over the world. They are qualified to lead. Why? Because they're not leading people according to they're not being led by their senses. When we're not being led by our senses, we have the quality. When we're not being led by our senses, we have the qualification to lead others. Because if we're being led by our senses, we'll simply lead people towards our own sense gratification, or we'll think that that's where they should be led to satisfy their own senses. And so there's a certain restraint, a certain clarity of mind, of heart that comes from detachment that qualifies a person to lead other people towards Krishna's lotus feet. And otherwise, we are just being led down a dark ditch. And therefore, that goes back completely to why Prahlad Maharaj himself, I lost the verse, by what Prahlad Maharaj himself was afraid of the common people in this world, because he didn't want to be misled by them. Okay. So those are some thoughts of this verse and its purport. It's 7:58. I left very little time for questions. Please excuse my ramblings and the conch is already going. They're ready to do it. So please accept my humble obeisances, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you being here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhagavatam ki jai.